Hello everyone, I'm Lien from Studio Kato, so a different Lien than you're used to, but I am so excited to be on the Crafty Meraki YouTube channel today. Today's colorful card uses products from Crafty Meraki, My Favorite Things, and Pinkfresh Studio. I die cut a panel with the Mini Slimline Essentials Bundle die set by Pinkfresh Studio, and the paper is Clairefontaine DCP 250 GSM cardstock. This is really cheap cardstock, but really smooth, so it handles the ink really well. I masked off an area on my panel using some torn strips of purple tape. This is a really quick and easy way to add some interest to your blending, and I'll be blending a rainbow onto that. I'm using a rainbow of Pinkfresh Studio inks, and I'll list all the colors I used in the supply list below. I'm using some blending brushes and a really light hand to blend all of these colors together. And after inking up my blending brush, I always dab it off to the side so I don't end up with any harsh lines from my bristles when I bring it directly to the paper. I'm mostly focusing my blending on the outside of the area. I do want some color in the middle, but I'm not too worried about it being smooth or perfect because I'll be doing some die cutting there as well. Now I chose this pink and I think it's a little bit too light for my liking, so I'll be going in with a darker pink over top of that. Making a nice rainbow blend is super easy. All you do is you overlap the colors with the previous one and the next one, and you have a smooth blend. Now I do worry a little bit about it getting muddy because I'm basically going into a circle, and I don't want that purple, for example, to touch the orange. So I did blend out the pink a little bit more towards the middle than maybe I would have done otherwise. So you do want to keep that in mind if you're blending in a circle like I am. Now the super satisfying part of peeling away that tape, and look how gorgeous that edge is that you end up with. Now there are stencils out there like this. I know MFT came out with a few and I love them, but they're just not made for mini slimline cards. So this is an easy way to get a similar look. Now I used a dead word die by Crafty Meraki, and I cut that out of the background I just made, but also ones from silver glitter cardstock and ones from black cardstock as well. I am going to add more elements to this card, dimensional elements, so I didn't want this to be dimensional, I wanted it to be flat, so I'm doing some basic die cut inlay. And I'm just trying it out with the silver on the inside of the letters, but I didn't like that very much, and I'm going to switch to rainbow later. Now I'll be left with a couple more parts of all of this, so I can do a lot of cards with the leftover pieces of the die I have. Now this is a super easy way to do this. You just put some purple tape on the back of all of that to keep it in place. And it's not going anywhere unless you really go in with your fingernails and peel out all those layers. It's not falling off or anything like that. So that's a really easy way to do some basic die cut inlay. If you're doing anything more intricate like I did here though, you might want to glue it onto a separate panel. Now I'm using this cute little bear stamp from the Travel Plans stamp set by My Favorite Things. And I did rub over that with my finger because it was new. And that gets rid of any residue that might be on the stamp and makes the ink stick better to it. And I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink for this. I did prep my cardstock. This is watercolor cardstock with an anti-static powder bag so I can do some clear heat embossing over this. Now onto the coloring. I love this part. I'm still new at showing the caps there, so I forget it a couple of times, but I'll try to list all of the colors I used in the description below. These are the Karin markers and they are available at Crafty Meraki. I really love these markers. They make watercoloring so easy. And I'm just using a soft brown here and blending that out with a fine paintbrush and some clean water. As I did with the ink blending portion of the video, I kept the first bit of this in real time so you can see how slow I go when I color. When watercoloring, I do like to work in layers, so this is the first layer. I will let that completely dry, and then I'll probably go over it a second time. This deepens up the color and the shadows, and it adds a lot of depth to your color. Now you don't have to use water to blend these out, that's just how I prefer doing it. These sets, if you buy a set of these markers instead of the individual markers, do come with blending markers as well. You can also just use these like you would use your Copic markers. If you use a darker marker for the shadows and then blend it out with a mid-tone and a lighter tone, you will get a similar result. I just prefer doing this because I'm so used to watercoloring. The paper that I'm using is Canson Mauval 200 GSM watercolor cardstock. I'm using Canson Mauval 200 GSM watercolor cardstock today. You do want to use a watercolor cardstock when using these markers. The markers blend beautifully on it, and if you use a different cardstock that's not used to handling the water, you might end up pilling the paper a little bit. Now I do change my mind on the colors a little bit later on, you'll see that. But basically how I chose my colors is I didn't want to use anything too flashy. I wanted it to be a little bit muted, a little bit lighter than the rainbow that I blended, so it would stand out nicely from the background. I also really wanted this bear to look like a dad to go with the card, so that's also why I am using some muted colors. So as you can see, the way I use these markers is I just put down some color in the parts I want to be the darkest, and then I blend it out with a fine paintbrush. Now here I went in with a dark orange, and I thought it would be a more muted, more red toned orange, and it's really not. So I'll go over that with a very muted green marker, which will turn it gray. And then I can go over it again with a more vibrant green marker, but it's still muted because of the gray undertones that we have. I'm finishing it up with a muted red for the book he's holding, and then this one is done, and I will fussy cut this out. There are matching dies for this one, but I am so bad at lining up matching dies. That's why I prefer fussy cutting. I die cut a sentiment banner, and then I will stamp out my sentiment on top of that with Versamark ink, and I will emboss it with white embossing powder. I did prep it beforehand with an anti-static powder bag. Now with all the elements in place, I can finally put this little card together. I love Mini Slimline cards. I've been slightly obsessed with them lately. I'm just adding some dimension to the entire panel by layering 4 layers of thick white cardstock behind it, and I'm using some Beary Arts Precision Craft glue to glue that all together. I'm doing the same with the sentiment banner. I cut 4 strips of white cardstock and I will layer that behind the sentiment banner. You can use foam tape for this or foam squares, but I find this easiest. It gets rid of all of my scraps of cardstock and it gives a more sturdy dimension. This will hold up very well in the mail. Your card does get heavier though, so if you layer a lot of dimension behind everything, you might end up paying more for postage. I then propped up that little bear with some foam squares, and then I'm adding some embellishments. This is an embellishment mix. There are bubbles in there, there are iridescent gems in there, and some clear hearts. And I'm using a lot of different things. I love this mix. And that finishes up this card. But if you know me, you know there's a matching envelope following. I am just following the instructions on the We Are Memory Keepers 123 punch board to make a mini slimline envelope. The bottom and top flaps end up a little bit too long on these mini slimline cards, so I just line up the score line with any old centimeter mark. You can use any mark, just eyeball it. You just want it to be straight, and then I trim it off a little bit. I can then reinforce the score lines, and now we can add a little bit of color to this envelope. I'm using the same technique of just tearing up some purple tape to mask off a little area. I will add some extra purple tape to make sure I don't blend over this. And then I'm basically going to do the same thing that we did with the background for the card. I'm using the same inks, and I'm also blending in rainbow order, and this will make it match nicely. This is a super easy way to make a matching envelope and tie your little happy mail together. I also quickly wanted to mention that slick surface I do all my blending on is just a laminated sheet of white cardstock. This is super easy to clean, so it's perfect for blending your inks. And then we get the super satisfying reveal again, and then we can just assemble the envelope. I'm just adhering the bottom half together, obviously. If you're giving this card to someone, you can add some double-sided tape to the top flap so they can seal it when they send it off. And that finishes up the card and matching envelope. I hope you like it. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up and leave a comment and subscribe to the Crafty Meraki YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.